With the end of World War II, crime rates, particularly the rates of violent crimes, rose throughout many cities within Europe and the United States. But Los Angeles was a city unlike the rest. A town that was transforming into a city full of dreams and desires. However, its ugly, darker side was also being awakened. With crime rates nearly 10 times greater than any other Californian city, author Jim Hyman described the underbelly of Los Angeles like festering oranges rotting in the perpetual sun. Team Bondi researched the work of 1940s Los Angeles in order to create the game LA Noire, where you play as Detective Cole Phelps, solving a series of crimes inspired by the events of those times. But corruption is rampant, and the criminals we condemn along the way could well indeed be innocent after all, with their game and plot veiled in mystery in which Phelps struggles to find the truth. An iceberg is a popular image format that contains theories and facts, and it's ordered so that the most well-known theories are gathered higher up in the iceberg, and the lower and deeper the points are placed on the iceberg, the more obscure and perplexing the hypotheses become. The LA Noire iceberg was created by Azelf and Qualava over on Reddit, and as we go through these points, there'll be an interrogation UI briefly displaying how likely I think the theory is, with truth being shown when I think that a theory is either true or close to being true, doubt when the hypothesis is possible but has reasonable room for error, and lie when I believe that the point is close to being false. Now this iceberg has quite a few points, so I will be skipping over some points that I may think aren't as interesting. Now that we're equipped, let's interrogate the LA Noire iceberg. Noir instead of noir. The game's title, LA Noire, is actually a clever combination of many of the themes around the game. The LA is a common abbreviation for Los Angeles, the city where the game is centered around. However, noir actually represents noir, which is French for black. This term has a slightly different meaning in English, with film noir being used to describe Hollywood crime drama with cynical motivations. And these were quite popular around the 1940s and 1950s, which was the era that this game was based in. There is also a music genre called jazz noir, which was inspired by the scores in many of these films and is also similar to a lot of the music we hear in LA Noire. But based upon this, the game should be titled LA Noire without the E, so why is the E being used here? In French, nouns are gendered, with some nouns being masculine and some being feminine. The adjective black is noir when the noun is masculine, but noir when the noun is feminine. In a similar fashion, the word the has a masculine and feminine form. For example, table is a masculine noun, so the black table is le tableau noir, while chair is a feminine noun, so the black chair is la chaise noire. Because the title of the game starts with LA, la could suggest a feminine the, which could be why we have the added E in the title. In a similar vein, Voltaire 26 suggests that cities are female in French, so if the title was Black Los Angeles, which could be emphasising the crime, corruption and lack of morals riddling the city, this could be directly translated to LA Noire. There is also a rumour around the internet that I can only link back to GameFAQs user Perfect Light, who mentions that some French websites have stated that LA Noire is actually a pun on the statement Elle est noire, translating to she is black. This could be a reference to the woman known as Black Dahlia, who inspired most of the homicide cases. We'll delve into this more a bit later. Ultimately though, having the extra E in the title of LA Noire is definitely there for a reason, if not many reasons. Police GTA clone. Now many people think that LA Noire is just a clone of Grand Theft Auto, as both games are published by Rockstar, and you can seemingly roam around a bustling city in all of these games. But LA Noire is definitely not like GTA. Team Bondi, the developers of LA Noire, were formed in the later part of 2003 by former Sony Computer Entertainment director Brendan McNamara. These games that McNamara developed with Team Bondi were meant to be published by Sony Computer Entertainment. However, in September 2006, Rockstar Games took over as publisher, with LA Noire finally being released in November 2011. This means that 3 of the 8 years of development of LA Noire were actually not with Rockstar involved. But it's important to realise that McNamara was inspired by games like Grand Theft Auto, and he wanted to create his own version of that. So while LA Noire isn't a clone of GTA, it's definitely been inspired by it. Real life cases. LA Noire is actually based upon a lot of real life events, with Rockstar stating that all of the cases have in some form been inspired by real events. I really wanted to go into a lot of detail for this point of the iceberg, so I've made a separate video, The Real Crimes Behind LA Noire, which I'll link in the description, that will go thoroughly over this single point. And believe me, there's a lot of details to unpack here. So I definitely encourage you to check that video out. Biggs is the narrator. There are 6 different department desks that Phelps works on during the game: Patrol, Traffic, Burglary, Homicide, Vice, and Arson. The introduction desk to the game, the Patrol desk, is the only desk that is narrated by someone. This is narrated by Keith Sarabika, who is also the detective Herschel Biggs, who is Phelps' partner in the Arson desk, so we can safely assume that Biggs is the narrator of this Patrol desk. But why is it that Biggs is the narrator? Couldn't it have easily been anyone else? Chuckles465 suggests that Biggs is fundamentally the seasoned Cole Phelps, having also been through the same struggles, seeing the corruption of the LAPD. He has a similar ideology to Phelps, which is why he joins his crusade to take down the corrupt criminal syndicate of the Redevelopment Fund. With Phelps essentially following Biggs' shadow, except for the affair controversy, Biggs' narration could be a foretelling of Phelps' endeavours, or the guidance by Biggs himself. Malcolm7281 suggests that perhaps Biggs decided to retire from Arson after the end of LA Noire and decided to write a novel about Cole and his actions while at the LAPD. And to provide more information about Cole, he asked other detectives to provide their versions of the story. The collection of these anecdotes then formed the story of LA Noire, which he, of course, narrates as he wrote it. This book could essentially be a tell-all book about Cole's history, which reveals the good and bad of his life, as well as the truth of the Suburban Redevelopment Fund scheme. The early game narration could also be seen as a framing device for this, but for some reason, it never ended up being followed on. Baby oil. The pedestrians of LA Noire have many amusing pieces of dialogue.
The early bird gets the worm. The second mouse gets the cheese.
One of these pieces of chatter is to do with baby oil.
If olive oil comes from olives, where does baby oil come from?
This conversation is a form of shock comedy, with one of the more common examples for this being in the Addams Family movie.
Is this made from real lemons? Yes. I only like all natural foods and beverages, organically grown, with no preservatives. Are you sure they're real lemons? Yes. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll buy a cup if you buy a box of my delicious Girl Scout cookies. Do we have a deal? Are they made from real Girl Scouts?
The olive oil joke is actually first accredited to American stand-up comedian Stephen Wright, who was only born in 1955, so it's a bit strange that a game based in 1947 is referencing a joke from the future. Mad Men references. Mad Men is a drama television series detailing the mysterious events of the New York ad agencies in the 1960s. If you've both watched Mad Men and played LA Noire, you might notice some strange similarities between the two. Protagonist Cole Phelps' actor is Aaron Satin, and he plays account executive Ken Cosgrove in Mad Men. In the case A Marriage Made in Heaven, if you walk on top of the blood in the crime scene, Coroner Malcolm Carruthers states,
"Careful where you're stepping, Phelps. I don't come down to the station house and tap dance on your desk."
YouTuber CapKey26 speculates that this tap dancing is a reference to Mad Men Season 6 Episode 8, where Ken Cosgroves is stating what his job responsibilities are while tap dancing. However, this episode of Mad Men, The Crash, was first aired in 2013, which is 2 years after LA Noire was released, so this is definitely a coincidence as opposed to a reference. Other than Aaron Staton, there are many actors that both portray a character in LA Noire and Mad Men. Coroner Malcolm Carruthers is acted by the same person who played Dr. Andrew Wayne. Detective Sergeant Finis Brown is also acted by the same person who plays Marty Hasselback. Even Oswald Jacobs is in Mad Men. According to IMDb, there are 96 people that are credited in both Mad Men and LA Noire. To put that in perspective, LA Noire only had around 400 actors in the game. Even though not all of these credits were for acting, there's a huge portion of actors that are from Mad Men. So why are so many actors from Mad Men being in LA Noire? The answer might be a lot simpler than we think, with the game's casting director, Carrie Adino and Laura Schiff, already being responsible for the casting of the Mad Men TV show. One of Rockstar's art directors, Rob Nelson, stated that the actors were allowed to perform directly into the video game without any level of interpretation being needed. With a lot of the actings being TV regulars, they could easily transition to video games, being just another string to their career bow. Cut burglary and fraud desks. During development of the game, Team Bondi came across space issues. While the PS3 game was only using one disc, the Xbox 360 version of the game was already using 3 discs. It's assumed that due to these, 2 desks, the burglary and the bunco, which was also known as fraud, were cut from the final game's release. It seems that these were cut quite early on in development, as there is only little evidence to suggest that these desks were actually meant to be in the game. The Wilshire police station contains a bunco division room, which we'd assume would be where the desk would have been located for Phelps. One of the blackboards in the bunco room suggests that Albert Lynch could have been loosely connected to the bunco desk, but in the final release of the game, he's just the fire investigator who operates out of the Los Angeles Fire Department. The burglary desk was the other desk cut from the final release of LA Noire, although it still remains in Phelps' story, as between him working on the traffic desk and the homicide desk, there was around a 6-month time period in which Phelps spent his time at the burglary desk. We know this because Captain James Donnelly mentions it himself.
And the chief was seen fit to promote Cole Phelps from burglary to the homicide desk.
Harold Caldwell, a detective in the burglary department, was very friendly when interacting with Phelps, and through this, people theorised that Caldwell was Phelps' partner while at burglary. But in the case against the odds, Phelps introduces himself to Caldwell as if they had never met before. It was thought that both of these deaths could end up becoming DLC for the game. But combined with the internal struggles and demise of Team Bondi, along with the actors of LA Noire having busy schedules and moving on to other pieces of work, this DLC never eventuated. Now it's time for us to promote ourselves to the body desk of the iceberg. Team Bondi internal troubles. The making of LA Noire took a lengthy 7 years, with the game development in Sydney concluding as the most expensive video game ever made in Australia. These 7 years of development didn't go swimmingly, with the development continuously riddled with issues and poor working conditions. The founder of Team Bondi, Brendan McNamara, had allegedly spent tens of millions of dollars on new technology in just a single year. And this was while Sony Computer Entertainment America was still publishers for the game. They still had faith in Brendan McNamara due to the previous success of the PlayStation 2 title The Getaway. But ultimately, come 2005, LA Noire had far exceeded the price tag that Sony had put on the development of the game, and Sony dropped the project. Thankfully, Rockstar picked up LA Noire the next year, revamped and ported the game, apparently spending even more of a budget than Sony had previously. But this did not stop the frustrations at the Australian development studio. While nearing the end of its development, a Twitter account began to anonymously leak stories regarding Team Bondi and their grueling working conditions that caused a turnstile of employees coming and going. One of the original Australian developers anonymously commented to IGN that at first it was fun. New studio, big new game. As time went by and the project wasn't coming together as fast as management wanted it to be, they started to become aggressive and demanding. This led to people quitting, or being forced out when they didn't obey direct orders. It became a nasty place to be. McNamara was also perceived as a quite demanding individual, seemingly wanting to exert total control over everything that went on in Team Bondi. McNamara told IGN, "It's my game. I can go to anyone I want in the team and say, I want it changed." Other programmers on Team Bondi would also complain about this, with one stating that programmers couldn't go and tell Brendan that it's not feasible. He just wouldn't listen to reason. IGN asked McNamara whether this was true, and he responded, chuckling, "And is it a bad thing? I make video games. They're a personal statement for me. I write them, I direct them, I put the technology together to make them. I go out to the world and say, will you fund them? So if you think that's obsessive, absolutely." There were also allegations that employees had to work extremely long hours, with one programmer anonymously reporting that they had been working 15 hours a day, every day for 3 weeks. And after working 3 consecutive 100-hour weeks, he found out that half of the material he was working on was getting completely reworked anyway. One employee was triggered to leave the company in 2008 when they received a reprimand for conduct and punctuality after arriving at 9:15 AM, 15 minutes late for work. Now this kind of makes sense, until you realise that they had actually only left work at 3 AM on the same day, and they had to pay for their own taxi home. Another of the Aussie Five, lead gameplay programmer Dave Hieronymus, penned an open letter in July 2011 stating that during the end of the project, he was probably doing around 65 hours per week, and that he never got to 100 hours per week, and if anyone was working that hard on his team, he would have done his best to stop them. On the other hand, a whistleblower at Team Bondi released an email that was sent on the 4th of August 2009 from Brendan McNamara, which stated that the standard working days were from 9 AM to 7 PM, and as they got closer to the finish line, employees would be required to work Saturdays and then later Sundays. It's important to factor that LA Noire was constantly at a perceived finish line, with the projected timeline for release always being less than 12 months away. An anonymous gameplay programmer commented that when they started, there was less than 12 months on the project to go, and 2.5 years later when they resigned, there was still less than 12 months to go. Not only were there unrealistic deadlines and incredibly long working hours at Team Bondi, ex-employees also alleged that the studio's leadership suffered verbally abusive behaviour, with one stating that McNamara was the angriest person he's ever met, with it being incredibly common for him to scream at whoever was annoying him in the middle of the office. McNamara responded to this by saying, "Am I passionate about making the game? Absolutely. Do you think I'm going to voice my opinion? Absolutely. But I don't think that's verbally abusive." Originally, Rockstar viewed Team Bondi as a company that could be moulded into Rockstar Sydney. But the more they worked with Team Bondi, the more they came to understand that it was a terrible idea. As time went on, the relationship between Team Bondi and Rockstar began to deteriorate, with one of the pinnacle moments of this being when Rockstar redesigned the LA Noire logo, which had a Rockstar logo with it, but no Team Bondi logo alongside it. McNamara was furious with this, with him accidentally emailing everyone, "Every dog has its day, and there's going to be hell to pay for this one. I'll never forget being treated like an absolute bleep by these people." Once the game was finally released in May 2011, the game's credits roll was missing over 130 staff members who had contributed to LA Noire, with ex-Team Bondi workers launching a website listing the complete LA Noire credits. And ultimately, 2 months after LA Noire's release, Rockstar officially split from Team Bondi, with rumours of Rockstar's disdain for Team Bondi and their clear sentiment that they would not publish Team Bondi's next game coming into fruition. So what happened to Team Bondi after Rockstar? On the 5th of October 2011, Brendan McNamara announced that Team Bondi was closing down, with most of the staff and assets transitioning to Kennedy Miller Mitchell, a production company that's most known for being responsible for the Mad Max and Happy Feet franchises. At this point, Kennedy Miller Mitchell was looking to enter into the video game industry with an action-adventure game, The Whore of Orient, beginning development in 2012 and targeting a 2015 release. This game was set in 1936 and was meant to be centred around the corrupt city of Shanghai in the hands of Western powers. This game was also supposed to be using the motion scan technology depth analysis, which was first used in LA Noire. However, a couple of years later, in April 2013, it was rumoured that the former members of Team Bondi were laid off, with Screen New South Wales later investing $200,000 just to keep the project alive. But unfortunately, in June 2016, it was all but confirmed that the game was effectively cancelled, with the company only having one official screenshot and some leaked gameplay footage in the rubble of their cancelled project. Floyd Rose dropped plotline. Floyd Rose is one of the first characters that we introduced with in LA Noire, where in the patrol case, upon reflection, he is investigating the murder of Scooter Payton, and during this, he bribes Cole Phelps and Ralph Dunn once they arrive at the scene to do an evidence search. And they end up finding a Smith & Wesson Model 27, which was the murder weapon used by Errol Schroeder. Upon further investigation by Phelps, inside Schroeder's apartment, is a notebook containing a list of names and numbers, most likely indicating people who have been paid money for one reason or another. Floyd Rose is one of the names that appears in this notebook, which indicates that he could have been taking bribes and become corrupt. Upon Ralph Dunn's insistence, Phelps drops the lead of Floyd Rose's corruption, and not too much more is mentioned until the start of Phelps' promotion to the homicide desk, when Captain James Donnelly mentions that Floyd Rose has decided to take an early retirement, which seems quite peculiar. Going back to upon reflection, it's actually unclear on whether Errol Schroeder is actually guilty of the murder. A common theory is that Floyd Rose actually stole the gun from Schroeder's apartment and he murdered Scooter. When Errol Schroeder is initially confronted with the information that it was his gun that murdered Scooter, he was honestly surprised when he found that his gun was not actually inside his drawer, where it belonged. This gun could have been planted by Rose on the crime scene, as the murderer did not even bother disposing of the evidence in easy to access places like a drain, but rather carelessly tossed the gun over the rooftop of the closest building. Phelps also commented that the shooter pushed the victim up against the wall before shooting him, which leads towards the murder being more of a passionate one. LA Noire is in a time period where racial tension is very high, and Eugene Ryder suggests that Floyd Rose could have killed Scooter as a racist killing, with Floyd Rose commenting that,
"The dead guy's a lowlife. I'm not expecting any miracles here."
Eugene Ryder also suggests that perhaps Floyd hired Schroeder to kill Scooter, with Schroeder then possibly hiring another person to do the killing. But I don't think that this theory really adds up, as I think that if this was the case, Errol wouldn't have used his own gun, and I don't see any specific motive as to why Floyd would premeditate this murder. But we need to remember that Floyd Rose is a corrupt detective, so he could potentially be trying to cover up his slowly emerging past, perhaps by murdering one witness to his corruption and jailing another. Schroeder's notebook that lists Floyd Rose contains dates and a numeric item, which suggests that Schroeder either gave or received money from Floyd Rose. The other names in this book are other members of law enforcement, with Graham Sommers and Theodore Rossi, like Rose, also being detectives, and Sam Kaplan and Leroy Tate being officers. So this very much seems like a note of bribes being taken place, or hush money from law enforcement keeping Schroeder silent. I think it's more likely that Schroeder was most likely being paid to keep silent, but was asking for more and more money, with Floyd Rose having to pay $40 and $50 in the space of less than 2 weeks. Perhaps instead of paying his dues, Floyd thought that it would be easier to frame Schroeder, and keep the money and his secrets all to himself, with enough corruption in the law enforcement making sure that Schroeder remains silent behind bars. This plotline could have been solidified and deepened during the burglary timeline, which was meant to happen after this case and before Floyd Rose is sent into an early retirement. But unfortunately, all we can do is speculate as to what could have happened. Interrogations. When interrogating individuals in LA Noire, there are 3 options that Cole Phelps can reply with in order to obtain more information pertinent to the case. In the original release to the game, they were labelled as truth, doubt, and lie. Truth and lie seem self-explanatory. When you think the person is telling the truth, select true, and if you think they are lying and you have evidence to back it up, you'd select lie. But doubt seemed a bit harder to select, as it meant to be used when people are withholding the truth, or lying about something with no evidence to prove. An example of this complication could be when Coombs is being interviewed in the slip of a tongue.
When exactly did you hand over the check, Mr. Combs?
Coombs responds with,
"Close of play on Friday."
Now this is the truth, but the correct response to this is actually doubt. When doubt is selected, Cole asks a separate question.
Why didn't you pay her cash? You knew the car was dirty.
This seems like a harsher follow-up instead of directly doubting Coombs' statement. Due to this, in the remastered edition of the game, these have been translated to good cop, bad cop, and accuse. With bad cop meaning that Phelps has to get quite rough to extract an answer from the individual. Originally though, in development of LA Noire, the options were actually coax, force, and accuse, which to me makes the most sense, with you trying to coax information out of an individual, trying to force information out of them, or accusing them of lying with evidence provided. And this would have worked great in the Coombs interview. But during testing of this, it showed that the players of the game didn't actually understand what to do with these options, so they ended up originally changing it to truth, doubt, and lie, as you were stating how you think the interviewee is acting, rather than how Phelps himself should act. Potentially they change these in the remastered version of the game to good cop and bad cop, because it's a well-known psychological tactic that's used in negotiation and interrogations, in which the good cop adopts a sympathetic demeanour, and the bad cop adopts a more accusatory tone. Unseen Vice Desk Captain. Each desk in L.A. Noire has a captain who is responsible for delegating detectives to each crime. The traffic desk has Captain Gordon Leary, James Donnelly is the captain for the homicide desk, and Lachlan McKelty is the captain at the arson desk. However, the Vice Squad has Lieutenant Archie Colmier designating detectives to crimes, assuming the role of an acting captain. The actual captain for the Vice case, Lazarus Caffarelli, is unseen. His office also seems to be in another building, that of the Central Police Station, which is far away from the Hollywood police station where Vice is situated. Isn't it strange that Caffarelli is the only captain who is never seen or mentioned in the game? When Phelps is first introduced to Vice, it was said that the head of Vice has asked the chief for Cole Phelps. But this head of Vice never actually sees Phelps in person. Teddy Jamie supposes that potentially Caffarelli was aware of the corruption of the members of his department, with both Roy Earle and Archie Colmier appearing in Leyland Munro's corrupt payroll, and he was potentially spending the entire time in his office, investigating his own team. Maybe this is included to try and make the player question or become suspicious to the Vice desk, or perhaps this was potentially a storyline that was also cut from the game, with the only remnant left being the office. Now let's investigate the corruption in the depth desk of the Iceberg. Suburban did themselves in. The Suburban Redevelopment Fund, led by Leland Munro, was a private organisation that had the intention of funding and developing new homes. However, the Suburban Redevelopment Fund was corrupt and began embezzling millions of dollars, constructing houses with subpar materials, which resulted in the houses built being dangerously unsafe. Jack Kelso investigated the shady situations around the redevelopments, and he eventually became the fund's undoing. The main piece of evidence for this was a film reel, which showed all of the perpetrators of the embezzlement admitting to their crime on film. So by filming this, the Suburban Redevelopment Fund basically incriminated themselves. But why on earth would there be a film about this top secret meeting? Nathan Sanes suggests that someone secretly filmed the meeting as an insurance policy, or a way to blackmail someone in the group if they needed to. I think that rather than a single person filming this for insurance or blackmail, this was a group decision by the whole Suburban Redevelopment Fund. This was to make sure that if anyone developed a conscience or thought about exposing the Redevelopment Fund, then the reel would then expose them all equally, like an all or nothing mentality. They thought that this film would never see the light of day, and they never intended to be undone by their own insurance policy. Red Lipstick Murder Hidden Knife. At the Red Lipstick Murder crime site, not all the suspicious materials around are actually evidence for the crime. A short distance from the crime scene, hidden in the bushes and next to a bench, a knife can be found. More accurately, a switchblade. But why would developers purposely place a knife there that you could pick up, but it has nothing to do with the case? Iceberg creator Azelfin Qualava theorises that this implies that the werewolf killer isn't the only killer in the town. Maybe it was planned to have evidence that you could pick up that were red herrings. Other evidence, such as the homicide crime scenes often containing cigarettes, were also deemed irrelevant, but maybe they would have had a purpose in mind. Interestingly, this knife found at the bench is the same one as the one found on Carlo Aguero, an Italian mobster and boxing manager who was later killed by Phelps. Maybe this is hinting that somehow Carlo is involved in the Red Lipstick murder case. Number Station's Easter egg. During the case, The Black Caesar, if you go to Jermaine Jones' booking agency office and play around with the radio by changing it to shortwaves, a strange broadcast can be stumbled upon. A list of numbers are listed off in a variety of languages, in a reference to what is known as number stations. These are used by intelligent officers that are operating in foreign countries, sending encrypted messages back home with the hope of only the intended receiver being able to understand them. The first known use case of number stations in the real world were during World War I, with the numbers originally being transmitted in Morse code and also through short waves. The shortwave radio in the game can also be found transmitting messages through Morse code as well. Many people just palm this off as an Easter egg with no meaning. But what if this is actually a puzzle? Rockstar are no strangers to teasing riddles and mysteries in their games, with the still relatively unsolved mystery of Mount Chiliad being a more popular example of this in GTA 5. So could they have done the same here? Could this not have the possibility of being a dormant puzzle that has not been solved? I would not let this remain unanswered, and I spent a lot of time translating and researching the code in order to try and figure out what the numbers could mean. But I couldn't really find any message that made sense. But what I did discover was that quite a few, if not all of these shortwave messages, were actually from the Incognito project. These are a set of shortwave recordings that have been used in numerous films and albums, and I guess that LA Noire is another video title to add to that list. The Incognito project is made from actual transmissions in real life, so the good news means that these transmissions actually could end up being solved. Maybe one day we'll dive deeper into these number stations, but we could just be wasting our time, as number stations could just simply be used for the creepy effect of having a lone, automated voice that repeats gibberish endlessly, causing paranoid governments to waste a lot of their time and money to decrypt data that is in fact total nonsense. Cole has a foot fetish. Forensics in modern day is quite advanced, with the use of DNA testing solving and helping many crimes of the past. In the 1940s, these methods were not available for investigators, and forensic science was still very much in its infancy. Despite this, investigators recognised that physical clues were still very crucial to any investigation, with imprints of tyre tracks and footwears taken at crime scenes. In fact, according to the analysis of footwear impression evidence by Sagar Strahari, the impressions of footwear patterns are the most commonly found type of evidence in crime scenes. Many homicide cases revolve around footwear being a key piece of evidence, both at the crime scene and examining shoes at houses. Cole Phelps can seemingly estimate shoe sizes at these crime scenes without needing any form of reference, and this has spawned many memes and thoughts around Cole Phelps and his obsession with feet. I think that rather than Cole Phelps having an obsession over feet, this is more of a shortcut to avoid Phelps needing to travel to different locations to obtain the necessary data. The last case when Phelps is in patrol, Buyers Beware, takes place at Nunsbush Shoes. GamerGuy3678 suggests that this might be a subtle connection for Phelps to begin remembering all of the shoe sizes instead of having to wait for forensics and later investigations. And I quite like this theory. Kalu was a veteran. Edgar Kalu is the main suspect in the patrol case Buyer Beware, where it's conspired that he murdered shoe store owner Everett Gage when his heritage was insulted. Kalu's gun was a piece of evidence found in a rubbish bin near Gage's store. This gun was an FN Browning 1922, a semi-automatic handgun. Andrew Fickman, the owner of the Eagleson's gun store, states that this weapon is rare in the United States, but is quite popular among Europeans. In real life, the FN Browning Model 1922 was a variant of the more popular FN Model 1910, and both were manufactured by the Fabrique Nationale in Belgium, having been designed by John Browning. These were originally manufactured with plastic grips with an FN logo, but the gun we can see in LA Noire actually uses a wooden grip. These wooden grips were only made when Nazi Germany had occupied Belgium and seized the FN factory during World War II. So how could Kalu get a hold of a weapon that was created on the other side of the world? As in the real world, the Model 1910 and the 1922 were not even introduced into the American market until 1955. Azelf and Qualafa speculate that Kalu himself took back the weapons after the war, having been part of World War II. And I think this could have been very likely to be an unwritten piece of law, due to the remarks that Fickman makes about its rareness, as well as Kalau's subsequent actions and negative thoughts in Los Angeles, which could have been caused by the war. Briefly sidestepping to another point, The members of the 6th Marine Regiment and other Marines are sometimes referred to as soldiers. Calling a Marine a soldier is often seen as degrading, as being part of the Marine Corps is seen by the mariners as earning a special privilege of being called a Marine. And of course, they are separate from soldiers. In short, Marines are a smaller, more specialised department focusing on amphibious activities and expeditions, while the Army is a larger group for land-based operations. The referencing of soldier in LA Noire instead of Marines is most likely just an accidental mistake.
War's over, soldier!
I know that, Sarge.
Hogaboom and Mason connection. During the war, Ira accidentally killed many Japanese civilians and went through a complete mental breakdown. Fast forward to 1947, Hogaboom returned to downtown Los Angeles and was exploited by the sinister Suburban Redevelopment Fund, where he began rationalising death as a transformation into something better, which allowed him to murder without remorse. Hogaboom also had the nickname of Tex. Strangely though, in the red lipstick murder, the victim, Celine Henry, has lipsticks marking on her body, which had explicits against BD, and the words Tex. This case is actually inspired on yet another true story. And more broadly, all of the homicide cases are actually inspired by true stories, which the serial killer, Garrett Mason, who is more infamously known as the Black Dahlia Killer, actually being a representative of the killers of the unsolved Black Dahlia cases in real life, with of course LA Noire allowing this case to be solved. Or so we think. In a similar vein, the red lipstick murder was actually inspired by a real life case, with Jean French, a flying nurse, being murdered with the word Tex being left on her body. IGN user Mine Rin supposes that this murderer, Tex, was a woman killer that struck in Chicago, and the message was actually a challenge to the Black Dahlia Killer. So potentially, Ira Hogaboom could be a rival serial killer that taunts Black Dahlia. The homicide case does conclude with Garrett Mason being the supposed murderer for all of the victims in the LA Noire case, with letters being sent to the LAPD with the same messages inside of it. So if Garrett Mason was the murderer in the red lipstick case, what would the text on the body mean? Evo8306 supposes that Garrett Mason was still the mastermind behind all the murders, but rather had others do the dirty work for him, with one of them being Ira Hogaboom. While the game suggests that these murders could be linked to Black Dahlia, one of the most significant parts in the real world of the murder was the mutilation of the body. However, this does not happen in any of the cases that we investigate during the gameplay, but perhaps in LA Noire canon, Black Dahlia was murdered different to reality. Going back to the real world murder of Jean French, the message BD was actually more likely to be towards PD, with the coroner stating that the writing in the lipstick was actually a P, with the extra mark just being from an unfinished D, that then ended up being written elsewhere on the body. And the media mistook this for a B. Investigative journalist Jem Rubio delves deeper into the text meaning, stating that the text is actually meaning Texas. As Jean was from Texas originally and she moved away, there's the potential that a past relative or friend wanted revenge on something that was from Jean's past. LA Noire would have purposely left this writing in to pay homage to the true inspiration they had in their cases. But I do not believe that Ira Hogaboom was the text killer, and this was just merely a coincidence, with the text just blurring real life inspiration and the ability to link the murders together. Stoneman supplied the chloral hydrate. Chloral hydrate is a piece of evidence found in the Fallen Idol case, where prop store owner Marlene Hopgood and movie producer Mark Bishop used it to sedate young Hollywood actresses to then exploit. If we take a closer look at this chloral hydrate bottle, we can see that it's actually prescribed by a physician, Dr. Harold Stoneman. Dr. Harold Stoneman appears in the later case on the Vice desk, The Naked City, in which he is portrayed as a doctor driven to corruption and crime through unrequited love, in which he would host parties for the upper class, while informing Julia Randall, who would then go and burgle the homes. So Stoneman isn't a man afraid to blur the lines of the law. So was he supplying the chloral hydrate to Bishop with the knowledge that it was going to be used for no good? Chloral hydrate is used as a short-term treatment to insomnia, a condition where people have difficulty sleeping. So Stoneman could have easily prescribed these for a made-up or genuine condition that Bishop had. Stoneman also seems quite remorseful for his actions.
Just lock me up and throw away the key.
So could he have committed more than just the crime he was caught for? His character was based off of the doctor of the same name in the 1948 film Naked City, in which he falls in love with Jean Dexter, who was murdered, also with a bottle of sleeping pills found. But in the movie, the Stoneman portrayed is not that sinister, and is portrayed as quite a respected figure. I think ultimately though, if Stoneman was indeed crossing moral lines with the law, then it would have definitely played into the plot of L.A. Noire. So perhaps this was just a small step in linking the world of L.A. Noire together through the cases that we work with, rather than a potential plotline that was later cut. This can also be seen in cases like the Golden Butterfly, where murder victim Deirdre Muller had a wedding ring and ruby engagement ring bought from the Hartfield's jewellery store, whose owner was a prime person of interest in the patrol case Buyer Beware. Well, that brings a close to the case that was the LA Noire Iceberg. As mentioned throughout this video constantly, I've made a supplementary video along with this iceberg so it can be digested easier, and if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy that one too. And thanks for making it all the way through this video. I know this iceberg was a little more factual than the other more theoretical icebergs that I've done, so let me know what you think about this one in the comments. And once again, thanks to Azelf and Qualava for making this terrific iceberg and inspiring me to make this video. And that's all for now. I hope to see you all again soon.